I asked my son, "So when's the wedding?" And my daughter-in-law, Brooke, looked me straight in the eye, smiled with a cold sweetness and said, "Oh, we already got married yesterday in Vegas. Only VIPs were invited." VIPs. 3 simple letters, but they cut through me like a knife. For 3 years, I had paid their rent, bought their furniture, stocked their fridge, and even contributed to the wedding loan. But in their eyes, I wasn't VIP enough to be at my own son's wedding. My name is Maggie Collins, and I am 65 years old, living in Austin, Texas. Since my husband passed, I've been alone, raising my only son, Ethan. For the past 3 years, I drained my retirement savings to support him and his wife, Brooke. I paid $500 every month for their rent like clockwork. I furnished their entire apartment sofa, dining table, bed. I filled their fridge when they claimed they couldn't afford groceries. I set aside $1,000 as a wedding gift, thinking it would be the proudest day of my life. I had even bought a pale blue dress, carefully chosen so I would look nice in Ethan's wedding photos. I had new shoes waiting in the closet. I had cleaned my house top to bottom, thinking they might stop by after the ceremony. I even called my sister Diana in Chicago to share the good news. But all of it collapsed in one single sentence. "We already got married yesterday. Only VIPs were invited." I stood frozen in my own living room, holding the phone as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. Ethan, my only son, avoided my gaze. And Brooke? She sat comfortably on the very sofa I had bought for them, as if it were her throne. In my head, images flashed. Brooke in her white gown, partly paid for with the $800 I had loaned her the month before. Photos of her family smiling proudly next to the bride and groom, raising champagne glasses. But me? The woman who had financed half the event? Completely erased. Those words echoed in my mind like poison. Only VIPs. I, who had drained my late husband's savings so they'd have a home, was not VIP. I, who had canceled vacations to cover their credit card bills, was not VIP. I, who had set aside $1,000 in cash as a wedding gift, was not VIP. In that instant, I felt both foolish and furious. What had I gained after years of sacrifice? A ticket to stand outside the most important day of my only son's life. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had planned surprises for them, where I had carefully wrapped birthday presents, where I had written checks with trembling hands whenever they pleaded for just a little more help. I opened a notebook and wrote down every penny I'd spent. Rent, $18,000 over 3 years. Groceries and household supplies, $7,200. Holiday and birthday gifts, $3,000. Their car loan, $2,500. Air conditioner repair, $600. Furniture, $1,200. Brooke's personal expenses, the wedding dress, $800. Total, $33,400. $33,400 enough to buy a brand new car, to travel to Europe 3 times, or simply to live comfortably in my retirement. And I had thrown it all away to support 2 adults who treated me like a bank with legs. When I finished the math, tears finally fell. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of anger. Anger at them, but mostly at myself. Anger at the years I had wasted believing money could buy affection. Anger at the way I had allowed myself to shrink into the background, hoping that if I gave enough, they might finally see me. Memories surged. The birthdays where Ethan barely said thank you before asking about the next bill. The Christmas mornings when Brooke's smile looked more like satisfaction than gratitude. The countless nights I skipped my own needs, eating beans and rice, so they could dine out. I had traded my dignity for scraps of attention, and I hadn't even realized it until that wedding. And yet, beneath the fury, there was something else. Clarity. A sharp, clean line had been drawn. For years, I blurred the edges, telling myself family was worth every sacrifice. But now, for the first time, I saw the truth. I wasn't family to them. I was funding. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, the same tired eyes, the same wrinkles. But behind them, something new flickered, a hardness I had buried for years, a determination I had nearly forgotten. I thought of my late husband, Robert, and what he would say if he saw how I had allowed myself to be treated. He would be furious, not at Ethan, but at me for giving so much of myself away. I brewed a cup of coffee, just for myself. I sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in years, I didn't check my phone for Ethan's messages. I didn't brace myself for Brooke's latest emergency. Instead, I sat in silence, savoring the bitter taste of coffee and the even sharper taste of clarity. I thought of everything I had put on hold: the trips I never took, the books I never finished, the garden I never tended, because there was always some new crisis of theirs. What if, instead, I spent the next years living for me? And in that quiet moment I made a vow. If I wasn't VIP at my son's wedding, then I would become the VIP of my own life. That night, after Brooke's cruel words, "only VIPs," I sat alone at my kitchen table. The pale blue dress I had bought for the wedding still hung uselessly in my closet, mocking me with every glance in its direction. I had chosen it carefully, imagining myself standing proudly in photographs next to my son. Now it was nothing more than a relic of humiliation, a reminder that I had been erased. One question haunted me as I sat in the dim light with a cold cup of coffee in my hands. What have I turned myself into? The house was so quiet it felt suffocating. The refrigerator hummed in the background, the clock ticked on the wall, but there was no life in it. I stared at the shadows stretching across the kitchen tiles and realized how many nights I had sat here before waiting for Ethan to call, waiting for Brooke to message, waiting to be needed. And they always did need me, but only for money. The silence pressed against me until I could barely breathe, and I thought, this is what I have left: an empty kitchen, an empty closet, an empty life. I flipped open a notebook and began listing every expense. I needed to see the truth in black and white, even if it hurt. The numbers glared back at me. $33,400 in just 3 years. $33,400. It wasn't just money, it was pieces of my life. It was the overtime hours I had worked in my 60s when I should have been resting. It was the vacations I never took, the dinners with friends I canceled, the hobbies I abandoned. That was more than enough for a summer in Italy, a new roof for my aging house, or simply peace of mind in retirement. Instead, I had funneled it all into Ethan and Brooke's bottomless pit of need. I remembered the sacrifices with painful clarity: skipping dinners out because Ethan's rent was due, canceling coffee dates with old friends because Brooke needed just a little extra for groceries, shelving my travel plans because they wanted new furniture. I even lived on beans and rice for a week so they could buy a Peloton bike, which they claimed they couldn't live without. I sacrificed my comfort, my dignity, and my joy, thinking that somehow this would translate into love. I thought my sacrifices would buy me something: gratitude, appreciation, maybe even inclusion. But what did I really get? Silence, cold avoidance. And finally, a phrase that shattered me into pieces: only VIPs. That's when it hit me with brutal force. I wasn't a mother in their eyes anymore. I wasn't family. I was just an ATM with feelings. When the money came, they smiled. When the money stopped, they turned away. It wasn't love they wanted. It was access. Access to my savings, my retirement, and the money my husband and I had built together with decades of hard work. The realization made my stomach churn. I felt used, hollow, and ashamed. Shame because I had allowed it. Shame because I had mistaken manipulation for love. Shame because deep down I knew I was afraid of being alone, and I let that fear drive every decision. I thought back to Ethan as a boy. How many nights had I carried him back to bed after a nightmare? How many mornings had I packed lunches, made sure his shirt was ironed, and cheered from the bleachers at his soccer games? I remembered his graduation day, how proud I was when I handed him a modest watch I had saved 6 months to buy. He had hugged me tightly then, and I believed it was love. When he first brought Brooke home, I hugged her too, relieved that my son would finally have a family of his own. I told myself, this is it. I won't be so alone anymore. But as the years passed, that dream twisted into something darker. Brooke's smile grew sharper, her demands bolder. Ethan's voice, once warm with gratitude, grew clipped, distant, ashamed to look me in the eyes. And now, when I looked at him, I no longer saw the boy who once clung to me for comfort. I saw avoidance, calculation. And Brooke? Her smile when she said, only VIPs, was so sharp, so cold, it sliced straight through my heart. And then came the harshest realization of all. I had let this happen. I was the one who justified every request. He's still young. He needs help. I was the one who told myself, things will get better once they're stable. I was the one who lied to myself. If I give just a little more, they'll finally see how much I mean to them. But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. Each dollar bought me nothing more than temporary silence, temporary tolerance. I had been buying scraps of attention, mistaking them for love, and the more I gave, the more invisible I became. They didn't see me. They only saw what I could provide. By dawn, my eyes burned from crying, but my heart felt strangely clear. The next morning, I stood before the mirror in my bathroom. Same wrinkles, same tired eyes. But this time, something else stared back at me. Resolve. The face of a woman who had endured humiliation, yes, but also the face of someone who was done being invisible. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at the same kitchen table where I had once calculated Ethan's rent and Brooke's emergencies. The steam rose slowly from the mug, curling in the morning light like a quiet reminder. This is mine, this moment, this life, it belongs to me. For the first time in years, I thought only of myself. I didn't check my phone for Ethan's texts. I didn't wait for Brooke's calls. I sat in silence, savoring the bitter taste of coffee and the even sharper taste of clarity. I thought of everything I had put on hold, the trips I never took, the books I never finished, the garden I never tended, because there was always some new crisis of theirs. What if instead, I spent the next years living for me? In that quiet clarity, I finally admitted what I had been afraid to face. I had confused love with money. I thought my worth as a mother depended on how much I gave. I thought the more I sacrificed, the more they would love me. But love bought with cash is not love, it's debt, and debt never breeds respect. The pain of being excluded from my only son's wedding cut me deeper than any wound I had ever known. But that wound also became my awakening. I no longer cried for Ethan and Brooke's betrayal. I cried for myself. I cried for the woman who had given away her peace, her savings, her dignity, all for an illusion of love. I cried for the years I had wasted chasing something that was never real. And then, as tears dried on my cheeks, something new took root inside me: defiance. I made a promise to myself right then. From this day forward, Maggie Collins would no longer live to please Ethan and Brooke. I would no longer measure my worth in dollars spent or sacrifices made. I would live to please myself. I would reclaim the years I had left, no matter how few, and fill them with choices that were mine alone. That moment wasn't surrender. It wasn't weakness. It was the first step of rebellion. After a sleepless night filled with anger and clarity, I knew one thing. I couldn't go on like this. For too long, I had been a shadow, empty, drained, and invisible. If my son and his wife only saw me as a bank account, then I would become something else entirely, a force to protect myself. The next morning, I walked into my local Wells Fargo branch. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and printer ink. A television mounted on the wall droned on about interest rates and community projects. A potted plant wilted in the corner, unnoticed by anyone rushing to deposit checks or sign loan papers. The young teller, who knew me well from all those monthly transfers, smiled politely, the same polite smile she had given me for years. I need to cancel every automatic transfer and close all joint access. From today on, no more money leaves my account without my approval. Her smile faltered. She blinked at me as though I had spoken in another language. Mrs. Collins, are you sure? You've been doing this for 3 years. Yes, I said firmly. My voice didn't shake, though my heart pounded in my chest. It's my money, and I'm finally going to use it for me. The moment my pen hit the signature line, I felt something snap inside me, not from breaking but from being released. It was like cutting the final thread of a rope that had been strangling me. I walked out of the bank lighter than I had felt in years, the Texas sun on my shoulders like a medal of victory. I sat in my car for a long moment afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, and whispered aloud, "You did it, Maggie. You finally did it." That afternoon I called a locksmith. Within hours, every lock on my house had been replaced. The metallic clicks of the new bolts sliding into place were music to my ears. I stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching the locksmith finish his work. "No one comes in unless you want them to," he said kindly as he handed me the new keys. For once, I believed it. I installed a Ring camera system. Every beep, every drill of the installation sounded like freedom ringing in my ears. It was a symphony of protection, a fortress I had built not for anyone else, but for myself. The red glow of the recording light made me feel safer than I had in years. Then I sat down at my computer and changed every password: bank accounts, email, Venmo, and PayPal. With each keystroke, I built a wall that Ethan and Brooke could no longer climb. My fingers trembled, but it wasn't fear, it was adrenaline, power, the exhilaration of reclaiming my life click by click. I wrote each new password on a sticky note and placed it in my safe, smiling at the irony. I finally had secrets worth protecting. That evening, my phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment the old instinct surged to pick up quickly, to fix whatever disaster he was about to unload. But I forced myself to breathe, to remember the vow I had made. "Mom," he said, his voice tense. "My card was declined. Did the bank mess something up?" "No," I replied, calm but cold. "I stopped the transfers. You're 35 years old. It's time you paid your own rent." A pause. I could hear his shallow breathing, his panic on the other end. Then Brooke's sharp voice cut in. "Renee, you can't just cut us off. Ethan's under pressure with work. We need your help." I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "I've spent years abandoning myself to help you, but from now on I'm prioritizing me." The silence on the line was heavier than any words. It stretched between us like a canyon. For the first time, I wasn't filling it with apologies or excuses. I let it exist. And then, without another word, I hung up. My hands trembled afterward, not from fear, but from the shock of freedom. 2 days later, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. The air felt wrong, disturbed. I knew immediately. Ethan and Brooke were in my living room with a stranger in a gray suit, rifling through my papers as if they owned them. My chest burned with fury. "This is Mr. Fisher, a family lawyer," Brooke announced quickly, her voice coated with fake concern. "We're concerned about your mental state. He's here to help manage your finances." I snatched the documents off the table, my hands surprisingly steady. "These are private. You have no right." Ethan softened his voice, fake concern dripping from every word. "Mom, you've been acting strange, changing locks, cutting money, installing cameras. You need oversight." I almost laughed, a bitter, sharp laugh that cut through the room. Strange. Strange is finally saying no after 35 years of yes. Their faces tightened, like children caught stealing. But I saw no shame in their eyes, only calculation. Brooke reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing it as if rehearsing for the courtroom scene she clearly imagined. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I picked up the phone and called Linda Chavez, a lawyer my late husband had once trusted. I told her everything, my voice trembling at first but growing steadier with each detail. Linda leaned forward, eyes fierce. "Maggie, this is elder financial abuse. You're not crazy, they are manipulating you. But you're not alone. I'll represent you." Relief washed over me like cool water after years in the desert. For the first time, someone was firmly in my corner. The very next day, Linda arranged for me to take an official cognitive test with Dr. Karen Moore. For 2 hours, I sat in a quiet office answering memory questions, solving math problems, and discussing my finances. I felt as if my entire life was on trial in that little room. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. This was my chance to prove to myself as much as anyone that my mind was sharp. At the end, Dr. Moore smiled warmly. "Mrs. Collins, your results are well above average for your age. You are completely competent." I walked out of that office taller, stronger. The Texas sun lit up the sidewalks as if applauding me. I finally had proof not just of my sanity, but of my strength. As I drove home, the Texas wind swept through the oak trees lining the street, whispering like a chorus of encouragement. Ethan and Brooke would not stop. I knew that. They would try harder, push further, maybe even bring the law into it, but I was ready. I was no longer the woman who wept because she wasn't invited to a wedding. I was Maggie Collins' mother, widow, survivor, and above all, a woman who finally knew how to protect her dignity. From now on, anyone who tried to strip that from me would discover one thing: I was no longer easy to break. The night before the hearing, sleep once again escaped me. But this time it wasn't grief that kept me awake, it was adrenaline. My kitchen table was buried under piles of documents, medical records, bank statements, affidavits. Each sheet of paper was a weapon, each tabbed binder a shield. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning transfers or calculating how to stretch my retirement money to cover someone else's bills. I was preparing for battle. I thought about Ethan as a child, his small hand clinging to mine on the first day of school, his voice trembling as he asked, "Mom, will you wait for me outside?" Back then, I promised I'd always protect him. Now, decades later, I had to protect myself from him. The bitter irony stung, but it also hardened my resolve. Linda called that evening, her tone steady and confident. "Maggie, tomorrow isn't just about money. It's about narrative. They'll try to paint you as unstable, irrational, even paranoid. Our job is to show the truth, a mother who has been manipulated and drained for years, finally drawing a line." "I'm ready," I told her, surprising myself with how steady my own voice sounded. And I was. The morning of the trial, I dressed carefully. Not in morning black, not in timid pastels, but in a tailored navy suit I hadn't worn since Robert's funeral. I pinned on the silver brooch he had once given me on our anniversary. It sparkled softly, a reminder that I was still someone's beloved, someone's equal, not just a mother to be used or dismissed. When I stepped outside, the autumn air of Austin was crisp, sharp with the scent of oak leaves. The drive to the courthouse felt surreal, every red light a drumbeat in my chest. As the Travis County Courthouse came into view, its limestone facade solemn against the blue Texas sky, I whispered to myself, "This ends today." Inside, the hallway buzzed with tension. On one side, Ethan and Brooke sat with Mr. Fisher, whispering frantically, their faces tight with worry. Brooke avoided my gaze, though I could feel her eyes darting toward me, cold and calculating. Ethan glanced at me once, quickly, then looked away, his shame hidden under a mask of indignation. On the other side, I wasn't alone. Mrs. Patel had come, her sari bright against the gray walls. 3 women from my garden club stood behind her, their presence solid as oak trees. Even my pharmacist, Mr. Nguyen, had shown up, determined to undo the manipulation Brooke had dragged him into. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded not by users, but by allies. Linda leaned close, her voice low but fierce. "Remember, answer calmly, directly. Don't let their lawyer bait you. Truth is on our side." As the bailiff called the court to order, I sat straighter. My palms were damp, my heart thundered, but there was steel in my spine. When Judge Harper entered, his gaze was stern but not unkind. He looked like a man who had seen too many families torn apart in this very room. His robe rustled as he took his seat, and silence settled over us like a heavy blanket. Mr. Fisher rose first, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Your Honor, this case is about a mother in decline. Mrs. Collins has shown paranoia, isolation, and erratic financial behavior. Our petitioners, her son and daughter-in-law, only want to ensure she is cared for." Brooke dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the part of the worried daughter-in-law. Ethan sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, as if holding back a flood of self-righteous anger. The words stung, but I didn't flinch. Let them spin their lies. Soon, the truth would stand taller. When it was our turn, Linda stood, her voice steady as granite. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of incompetence. What we have is a case of greed. For 3 years, my client financed the lives of 2 able-bodied adults, over $33,000 drained from her retirement. And when she finally said enough, they sought to punish her by declaring her unfit. That is not protection. That is exploitation." The courtroom murmured. Even the judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. One by one, our witnesses spoke. Mr. Nguyen explained how Brooke had misled him, turning an innocent signature into false evidence. Mrs. Patel described my clear thinking, my sharp memory, the countless conversations we'd had about gardening, books, and politics. My garden club friends testified that I was not isolated at all, that I was active, social, and full of life. Then came my turn. My knees trembled as I walked to the stand, but the moment I raised my hand and swore to tell the truth, a calmness washed over me. Linda asked the first question gently. "Mrs. Collins, can you tell the court why you chose to end financial support for your son and his wife?" I met the judge's gaze. "Because I realized I was being used. I was not a mother to them anymore. I was a bank account with legs. I gave $33,000 in 3 years. That money was supposed to be my security and retirement. Instead, it was drained on rent, bills, and luxuries that 2 healthy adults should have handled themselves. Mr. Fisher pounced on cross-examination, his tone sharp. Mrs. Collins, isn't it true that you installed cameras because you believed your son was out to get you? Isn't that paranoia? I steadied my breath. I installed cameras because my son and his wife broke into my home without permission. That's not paranoia, that's protection. A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Mr. Fisher pressed harder. And cutting off all contact with your only son, doesn't that suggest irrational behavior? No, I said firmly. It suggests boundaries. Boundaries I should have set years ago. By the time I stepped down from the stand, my legs were shaky, but my heart felt strong. As closing arguments began, Linda's words thundered through the room. This is not a case of an unstable mother. This is a case of a strong woman who finally chose to say no. If the court allows guardianship here, then any adult child could strip their parent of dignity the moment they stopped writing checks. That is not justice. That is theft disguised as care. The courtroom was silent as Judge Harper leaned back, his expression grave. I sat with my hands folded, praying silently not just for victory, but for the strength to endure whatever came. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one begging. I wasn't the one apologizing. I was standing, with allies at my back, ready to reclaim my life. Whatever the judge decided, one truth had already taken root inside me. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer weak. I was Maggie Collins, and I was finally fighting for myself. The guardianship petition sat on my kitchen table like a death sentence. Thick, stapled, and stamped with the county court seal, it looked harmless enough, just paper. But I knew what it meant. If Ethan and Brooke succeeded, I would lose everything: my house, my money, even the right to decide how to live my life. My own signature would no longer matter. My own voice would no longer count. For a brief moment, fear gripped me. The kind of fear that chills your bones and whispers that maybe they'll win, maybe you'll be silenced. The thought of strangers managing my every move, of Ethan and Brooke deciding when I could leave the house, what I could buy, even what doctor I could see, it nearly broke me. But fear quickly turned into fire. If this were war, I would not face it as a victim. I would fight back with evidence, with allies, and with the truth. I met with Linda Chavez, my attorney, that very afternoon. Her office smelled faintly of old books and fresh coffee, the shelves lined with thick legal binders. She had the calm authority of someone who had seen the ugliest battles but never flinched. Just stepping into her office felt like stepping into a fortress. "Maggie," she said, looking at me over her glasses, "in guardianship cases, the burden of proof is on them. They must prove you're incompetent. Our job is to show you're perfectly capable and that their motives are financial." Her confidence steadied me. We began assembling a defense binder that soon grew as heavy as a brick. Dr. Karen Moore's cognitive assessment. I had scored above average for my age. Bank statements, every rent transfer, every gift, every expense, adding up to $33,400 in just 3 years. Mr. Paul's affidavit, correcting Brooke's trickery at the pharmacy. Ring camera footage, Ethan and Brooke trespassing, rifling through my documents. Testimonies from Mrs. Patel and my garden club friends, living proof that I was active, social, and mentally sharp. Linda flipped the binder shut with a satisfying thud. "This isn't just a defense," she said, "it's a counterattack." We visited Mr. Paul at the pharmacy the next morning. When he realized Brooke had used his signature against me, his face drained of color. "I thought it was for insurance paperwork," he stammered. "I never meant to say you mismanaged medication. Please let me fix this." He drafted a sworn statement on the spot. "Mrs. Collins only purchases vitamins and occasional aspirin. She has no irregular prescriptions." I was misled. His hands trembled as he signed it, but in that moment, I felt the scales tip just slightly in my favor. Mr. Davis, my bitter neighbor across the street, was another story. He puffed his chest out as if being interviewed for television. "She's paranoid," he declared. "Yelling in the driveway, installing cameras everywhere." Linda smiled coolly, her pen poised over her notepad. "Sir, do you have any direct knowledge of Mrs. Collins's health?" His face reddened. Well, no, but thank you, that will be all. He sputtered, slammed his door, and ended the conversation. His so-called testimony would collapse like a house of cards under cross-examination. Back at Linda's office, we spent hours rehearsing my testimony. She played the role of Mr. Fisher, grilling me with sharp, cutting questions. Why did you cut off financial support so suddenly? Aren't you afraid you've isolated yourself from family? Why install cameras? Isn't that paranoia? At first, my voice wavered, and the old habit crept back. I wanted to explain too much, apologize, soften the truth. But Linda stopped me each time. Plain answers, Maggie. Calm and direct. The truth doesn't need embroidery. So I tried again, and this time my words came steady. I cut support because I was being exploited. I'm not isolated, I've built new, healthy relationships. I installed cameras because my son and daughter-in-law broke into my house. Linda nodded with quiet satisfaction. Good. Truth spoken plainly will outweigh any performance from them. The night before the hearing, Mrs. Patel knocked on my door carrying a plate of cookies. Behind her stood 3 of my garden club friends, their smiles warm, their presence strong. Maggie, she said, pressing the plate into my hands. We're coming with you tomorrow. You don't have to face them alone. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Tears stung my eyes not from sadness, but from gratitude. For years I had been surrounded by people who drained me. Now I was surrounded by people who lifted me. That evening, Linda sat with me one last time, outlining our courtroom strategy like a general before battle. Undermine their motives. Prove Ethan and Brooke were after money, not my well-being. Highlight their dependence. A 35-year-old man who still leaned on his mother like a teenager. Demonstrate my competence, medical, financial, and social evidence. Flip the narrative. Expose their behavior for what it was: elder financial abuse. Her words lit a fire inside me. For decades I had been cornered, apologizing, shrinking, bending over backward to prove I was worthy of love. Tomorrow, I would stand tall. That night my house was quiet, the kind of silence that used to make me ache with loneliness. But now, it felt different. It wasn't emptiness, it was calm before the storm. I spread the binder across my table, pages of bank transfers, affidavits, photos, letters. Each sheet told a story of betrayal, yes, but also of resilience. I ran my hand across the cover, feeling its weight. It wasn't just paper. It was my voice, my proof, my shield. For the first time in years, I believed my story mattered. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just be defending myself in court. I would be declaring something to Ethan, to Brooke, and to anyone who ever thought love could be bought. I am Maggie Collins. I am competent. I am free. And I will never again pay for affection with my dignity. The week before the trial, tension rippled through every corner of my life. I knew Ethan and Brooke would not surrender easily. But I didn't expect them to show up at my door one quiet Thursday afternoon, their silhouettes framed against the fading Texas Sunday. The doorbell rang sharply, and when I opened it, Ethan stood there, hands shoved into his pockets, avoiding my gaze. Brooke, on the other hand, wore a carefully crafted expression, half sorrow, half indignation. "Mom, we need to talk," Ethan muttered. Against my better judgment, I let them inside. The living room, the same one I had once filled with laughter and birthday candles, suddenly felt colder, darker. Brooke sat on the sofa I had bought for them years ago, crossing her legs like she owned the place. Ethan hovered by the window, pacing. Brooke's voice was syrupy at first. "Maggie, this court thing, it's gotten out of hand. Do you really want to air our family's problems in front of strangers? We can fix this privately." I folded my arms. "Privately means I keep paying, doesn't it?" Her smile faltered, but she pushed on. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Ethan and I love you. We just think you've been stressed, confused. If you drop your opposition and let the guardianship happen quietly, we'll make sure you're comfortable. You'll never have to worry about bills again." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. Comfortable? They wanted me to hand them the keys to my entire life in exchange for an allowance like a child receiving pocket money. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. "Mom, this is your chance to make peace. You're embarrassing yourself. You're making us look bad." Anger burned in my chest. "Making you look bad? You tried to strip me of my freedom. You broke into my house. You told me I wasn't a VIP. At my own son's wedding. And I'm the one embarrassing you? His face flushed. That's not fair. Fair? My voice rose, cracking through the silence like a whip. Was it fair when I skipped meals so you could eat steak? Was it fair when I drained your father's savings so you could buy that bike you swore you couldn't live without? Was it fair when I bought your wedding dress and wasn't even allowed at the ceremony? Don't you dare lecture me about fair. Brooke leaned forward, her mask slipping. If you don't stop this, Maggie, the court will see you as unstable. They'll take everything anyway. At least if you agree now, we can control the damage. We're trying to protect you. Her words dripped with poison, every syllable an attempt to twist the knife, but I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. This wasn't concern, it was desperation. They knew the evidence was stacked against them, and they wanted me to surrender before the fight even began. I took a deep breath, my voice steady, icy. Protect me? The only thing you're protecting is your lifestyle. You're not worried about my health. You're worried the gravy train has stopped. Ethan's shoulders tensed. He looked like a little boy caught in a lie, but instead of shame, his face hardened with anger. Fine, do it your way, but when the judge hears how paranoid you've become, don't say we didn't try to help. Brooke grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door, but not before turning back to me with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. You're making a mistake, Maggie. No one will be on your side forever. The door slammed behind them, the sound echoing through the empty house. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. For a brief moment, the old doubts tried to creep back in. What if they're right? What if the judge believes them? What if I end up alone? But then I looked at the binder on my kitchen table, thick with evidence, testimony, truth. I thought of Mrs. Patel's warm smile, of Linda's unwavering confidence, of the garden club women who had already promised to stand by me in court. I wasn't alone, not anymore. I walked to the window and watched Ethan and Brooke climb into their car. They didn't look back. Good. Let them drive away with their threats and their lies. My life was no longer theirs to control. As the engine roared and their car disappeared down the street, I whispered to myself, "You wanted war. You'll get war. But this time, I'm not fighting as your mother. I'm fighting as Maggie Collins, and I will not bow." The house grew quiet again, but it no longer felt like loneliness pressing in. It felt like resolve. They had tried one last time to intimidate me, to break me down before the battle. Instead, they had given me fuel. Their desperation only proved what Linda had said all along. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about their greed. I sat at the kitchen table, opened the binder, and ran my hands across its heavy cover. Tomorrow or the next day, in court, the truth would be laid bare. And when it was, Ethan and Brooke would finally understand. The woman they thought was weak, foolish, and easy to manipulate was gone. All that remained was someone they had underestimated for far too long. The night after Ethan and Brooke stormed out of my house, silence wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. I sat in the living room, the binder of evidence still open on the table, but for once I couldn't focus on the neat rows of papers and highlighted notes. Instead, my eyes wandered to the photo frames lining the mantel. There he was, Ethan at 5 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, grinning proudly after his first soccer game. Another photo showed him in his cap and gown, my hand clutching his as though I could hold on to that moment forever. In every picture, I saw the little boy who once whispered, "Mom, don't leave me. Promise you'll stay." The tears came before I could stop them. I pressed my palms against my face, ashamed of my own weakness. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if Brooke had been right. Was I destroying my own family? Was I the one driving Ethan away? My chest ached with the weight of memories. The nights I stayed up sewing his Halloween costumes when money was tight. The mornings I packed his lunch with a handwritten note, hoping it would make him smile. The day Robert died, when Ethan wept into my arms and promised, "I'll take care of you now, Mom." Where had that promise gone? I stood and wandered into Ethan's old room. The posters were gone, but the faint outline of tape still clung to the walls where he'd once plastered his favorite basketball team. I sat on the edge of his childhood bed, clutching the faded quilt I had sewn when he was 10. My fingers traced the stitches, each one a reminder of love, sacrifice, and care. And for a moment, my resolve faltered. Was I really about to drag my only son into court? The thought was unbearable. My whole life, I had fought to keep him safe. from bullies at school, from illness, from heartbreak. Now, I was preparing to fight against him. The contradiction ripped at me like claws. I whispered into the empty room, "Robert, what would you tell me to do? Would you call me cruel for standing my ground? Or would you say I should give in, let Ethan have what he wants, if only to keep him close?" But the silence gave no answer. I buried my face in the quilt and sobbed, the kind of sob that shook my whole body. For a brief, dangerous moment, I imagined myself walking into the courthouse, handing the judge the binder and saying, "Take it all. Let them control everything. At least then I won't lose my son." The temptation was strong, so strong it terrified me. Because deep down, I still loved Ethan. Despite the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, a part of me still saw him as that little boy who once clung to my hand. But then, as the sobs subsided, something shifted. My eyes landed on the wedding photo Brooke had left behind during one of her visits. She stood in her gown, smiling like a queen. And I remembered her words, sharp as a blade, "Only VIPs were invited." The humiliation surged back, hot and bitter. That was when clarity returned. This wasn't about family. This wasn't about love. This was about control, greed, and entitlement. They weren't trying to keep me close. They were trying to keep me quiet, keep me compliant, keep me paying. I stood, clutching the photo frame. My hands stopped trembling. My voice, when it came, was low but steady. "Number I won't be erased. Not again." I placed the photo back on the dresser and walked out of the room, leaving behind the quilt, the memories, and the doubts. Back in the kitchen, I sat down at the table, the binder of evidence glowing under the lamp's light. I ran my fingers over the cover, feeling the weight of every page. It wasn't just paper. It was proof of my clarity, of my resolve, of my right to live as myself. Yes, I had nearly caved under the weight of love twisted into guilt. But that moment of weakness only made me stronger, because now I knew the truth. The cruelest thing I could do was surrender. To give Ethan and Brooke everything they wanted would not heal our relationship. It would only bury me alive. The tears dried on my cheeks, leaving behind a strange, fierce calm. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and sat in silence, watching the steam curl into the air like a promise. Tomorrow, I would face them again in court, under oath, before the eyes of the law. And this time, I would not tremble. I whispered into the quiet house, as if Robert himself could hear me. "I'm not weak. I'm not broken. And I won't let them take the rest of my life." For the first time in months, I went to bed, not haunted by fear, but steadied by resolve. The battle ahead was brutal, yes. But I had already won the most important war, the one against myself. The morning of the trial, I dressed in the simple black suit my late husband had once bought me. It had hung untouched in my closet for years, a garment tied to memory and grief. But as I slipped into it, buttoning each clasp with deliberate care, something shifted. I no longer saw a frightened widow staring back in the mirror. I saw a woman ready to defend her life, her dignity, her freedom. The silver brooch Robert had given me on our 10th anniversary glinted softly on my lapel, a reminder that I was more than just a mother discarded by her son. I was still someone's beloved, someone's equal. Travis County Family Court buzzed with tension, the corridors humming like a hive. The polished marble floors reflected the shuffle of anxious feet, the murmur of voices, the occasional clang of a door shutting too hard. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy, as though thickened by all the unspoken grievances that had been argued here over the years. On one side sat Ethan and Brooke, hand in hand. They dressed in somber black as though they were attending a funeral, but it wasn't mine they were mourning. It was their illusion of control. Their attorney, Mr. Fisher, a seasoned man with slicked-back hair and a smug smile, exuded confidence. His leather briefcase sat at his feet, bulging with papers meant to paint me as unstable. On the other side, I sat with Linda Chavez. Her presence was steady, grounded, like a lighthouse in a storm. Behind us, Mrs. Patel and my garden club friends filled the benches, their supportive eyes like lanterns in the darkness. Even Mr. Nguyen, the pharmacist, had come. For once, I didn't feel alone. The bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise." Judge Harper entered, robes flowing, his lined face betraying years of experience. He settled in with a grave expression, scanning the room before signaling for us to sit. Mr. Fisher rose first. His voice was smooth, practiced. Your Honor, this case is about protecting a vulnerable woman. Mrs. Collins has shown clear signs of mental decline, cutting off her family, installing unnecessary security systems, and acting paranoid. Her son and daughter-in-law only want to ensure her safety and manage her finances responsibly. His words dripped with feigned concern, every sentence rehearsed. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face calm. I had to. Brooke was the first witness. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. Maggie has always been like a second mother to me, but lately she's cold, erratic, isolating herself from the family who loves her. Oh. Linda rose, her heels clicking against the floor. Her voice sliced through Brooke's performance. Mrs. Taylor, when was the last time you called my client without asking for money? Brooke froze, lips parting soundlessly. I don't remember. Is it true you told her she wasn't a veep at her own son's wedding? Brooke shifted in her chair. That was taken out of context. Linda's eyes narrowed. What context justifies telling a mother she isn't special? Brooke had no answer. Next came Ethan. He looked uncomfortable, but pride stiffened his spine. Mom has changed. She's irrational. We fear she's being manipulated. Linda didn't waste time. Mr. Collins, how much money have you received from your mother in the last 3 years? He shifted. I don't know. Would $33,400 sound correct? The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Ethan's face reddened. At 35 years old, Linda pressed, do you still rely on your 70-year-old mother to pay your rent? He opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence screamed louder than any answer. Mr. Davis, the neighbor, testified next, describing me as paranoid for yelling and installing cameras. Under questioning, he admitted he had never spoken to me directly. His testimony crumbled into dust. Then came our turn. Dr. Karen Moore presented my flawless cognitive test results. Mrs. Collins is well above average for her age. She is fully competent. Mr. Nguyen admitted he had been tricked into signing paperwork. She only buys vitamins and aspirin. I was misled. His words echoed through the courtroom, his sincerity undoing Brooke's manipulation. Mrs. Patel and my garden club friends described me as engaged, articulate, and joyful. She teaches children how to garden. She leads conversations. She is anything but incompetent, one of them said proudly. Each testimony chipped away at their lies until the truth shone through like sunlight breaking storm clouds. Finally, it was my turn. My hands trembled as I raised them to swear, but when I began to speak, my voice grew stronger with each word. For 3 years, I supported Ethan and Brooke. Rent, groceries, emergencies, gifts over $33,000. I thought it would earn me love, or at least respect. Instead, I was excluded from their wedding with the words, only VIPs. Oh. I paused, scanning the courtroom. Brooke shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stared at the table. I cut off support not because I lost my mind, but because I found it. I realized I was not a mother to them. I was an ATM with feelings. And I refused to live the rest of my life buying affection that never truly existed. The room was so silent I could hear the ticking of the courtroom clock. Mr. Fisher tried one last time. This woman has clearly been manipulated by outsiders. She is confused, paranoid, and vulnerable. Linda rose for the final word. Her voice rang out like a bell. Your Honor, what we've seen today is not confusion, it's clarity. Mrs. Collins has spent years financing 2 fully capable adults. When she finally said enough, they called her crazy. This case is not about protection, it's about greed. The law should not reward exploitation. Judge Harper left to deliberate. 2 hours felt like an eternity. I sat, hands folded, heart pounding so loud it echoed in my ears. When the bailiff finally called us back, every muscle in my body was tight as a coiled spring. The judge's voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of a gavel. After reviewing the evidence, this court finds Mrs. Maggie Collins fully competent to manage her affairs. Cognitive evaluations confirm her mental sharpness. Her financial decisions are rational. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, the court advises examining potential elder financial abuse on the part of the petitioners. Gasps filled the room. Ethan's face drained of color. Brooke's mouth fell open before she lowered her gaze to the floor. Relief rushed through me like sunlight after a storm. My chest loosened, my breath came easier, and for the first time in years, I felt untouchable. As I walked out of that courtroom, Mrs. Patel squeezed my hand. "Maggie, you didn't just win for yourself. You won for every parent who's ever been exploited." I lifted my head high, shoulders back, the navy brooch catching the light. I wasn't just free, I was reborn. The courthouse doors closed behind me, and sunlight spilled across the steps like a blessing. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by fear or guilt. The verdict had been spoken. I was free, competent, and in control of my own life. But freedom wasn't just a legal status, it was a new way of living, a promise I owed to myself. The very next morning, I walked into the bank, no longer trembling like a customer in debt, but standing tall as the rightful owner of my future. The familiar scent of polished wood and printer ink no longer filled me with dread. Instead, it felt like opportunity. "I'd like to open a new account," I told the banker, looking him straight in the eye, "separate from anything tied to my son or daughter-in-law. From now on, every dollar is mine." When the clerk handed me the paperwork, my fingers didn't shake. I signed with a flourish, feeling lighter as if a weight of 30 pounds had been lifted from my shoulders. For years, every transaction had been for Ethan and Brooke, every check written with trembling hands. Now, every deposit and withdrawal would be for me, and me alone. In the weeks that followed, I indulged in simple pleasures I had long denied myself. A fresh haircut and warm chestnut highlights from Cynthia, my favorite stylist, who exclaimed, "Maggie, you look 10 years younger." A floral summer dress from a boutique on South Congress, bought not for anyone's approval, but simply because it made me smile. A new set of watercolor paints, and an easel from the art store downtown. For the first time in decades, I picked up a brush and painted the wildflowers I saw on my morning walks. My strokes were shaky at first, but they grew steady, almost defiant. With every color layered on the canvas, I felt years of invisibility fade away. My garden club friends quickly became my second family. On Saturdays, we planted roses, shared recipes, and laughed until the sun dipped low behind the trees. Their voices filled my once-empty days with warmth. One evening, Alfreda, the wise 80-year-old of the group, put her hand on mine and said softly, "Maggie, life begins when you finally put yourself first. Until then, you're only living for others." Her words pierced me like a revelation. I realized I had spent 3 decades living as an ATM, a caretaker, a provider, and a shadow of myself. But now, for the first time, I was living as Maggie Collins, a woman with her own dreams. I returned to the cemetery where my husband, Robert, rested. For months, I had avoided the visit, ashamed of how I had squandered the savings he had worked so hard to leave me. Sitting on the grass beside his headstone, I whispered, "Robert, I lost myself after you passed. I poured everything into Ethan, thinking it would be enough. But I see now I wasn't loved for me, just for what I could give. I'm sorry. But I promise you, from now on, I'll live the life you wanted for me." I placed fresh flowers on his grave, bright sunflowers, his favorite, and walked away lighter, as if he had heard and forgiven me. 3 months later, I sold the old house, the place where betrayal clung to the walls, where Ethan and Brooke had barged in with their lawyer, where my tears had soaked into the carpet. Letting go of it felt like shedding an old skin. I moved into a cozy apartment near Lady Bird Lake. From my balcony, the Austin skyline shimmered at night, and the water reflected the city lights like stars fallen to earth. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt alive. I began to travel. To Santa Fe, where I painted crimson sunsets that melted into the desert. To New Orleans, where I danced to jazz on Bourbon Street with strangers who made me laugh until my ribs ached. To the Gulf Coast, where I walked barefoot on the sand, letting the waves wash away the remnants of shame. Each trip reminded me that the world was still mine to claim, even at 65. I joined a food bank, handing out meals to people who looked at me with gratitude instead of entitlement. Their thank yous healed wounds deeper than money ever could. I called my sister Diana weekly, and our conversations were filled with laughter, childhood memories, and plans for visits. No more financial reports, no more excuses. Everywhere I went, people asked me, "Maggie, are you happy?" And for the first time in a long time, I could answer without hesitation, yes, I truly am. I had lost $33,400 to greed. That money was gone, and I would never get it back. But in return, I had gained something far more valuable: clarity. I finally understood what money could never buy: real love, real respect, real family. If someone needs to be paid to care about you, it isn't love. If you must buy your place in their lives, you don't belong there in the first place. Today, I am no longer desperate to be on anyone's VIP list. I am the VIP of my own life. My name is Maggie Collins, 65 years old. I have walked through betrayal, humiliation, and legal battles. But I emerged not as a victim, not as a discarded mother, but as a woman reborn. And if you are listening to my story, I want you to remember this. Never trade your dignity for affection. True love never comes with a receipt.